Hello everyone, I'm Nupur Sharma. I'm the editor-in-chief of Pop India. In September, just as the violence in Leicester was dwindling and the narrative against Hindus was peaking, I had interviewed Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is a British activist and he's one of the foremost voices against radical Islam. As soon as I had tweeted that I would be interviewing Tommy Robinson, I was met with a barrage of abuses, not just from leftists at home, but also leftists globally. I was told that I was interviewing a white nationalist, I was told I was interviewing a fascist, um, an Islamophobe, so on and so forth. While the abuse was peaking, I was speaking to British Hindus who had their own set of doubts as far as the interview was concerned. They urged me to put the interview on hold for a little while because they believed that if the interview was released by one of the journalists who was covering the Leicester violence, it would aid the global left and the Islamists in branding the British Hindus as white nationalist allies. And anyways, the narrative against Hindus was rigged against them. They were being called Hindutvavadis, radical Hindus, Nazis, so on and so forth. They were the victims, and I had to listen to them. So I did shelve the interview for a little while because I did not want to be a reason why the British Hindus would be endangered. But I hated it. I hated it so much. With every part of my being, I hated withholding an interview that I genuinely wanted to release. Not because I agree with everything Tommy says, but because I believe that every voice should be heard and that the global left should not have the right to dictate who gets heard, who doesn't, who we speak to, who doesn't, all this while labeling all of us as fascists. At that time, when I had put the interview on hold, I had released a statement, and I'd like to read that out to you. I announced the Tommy Robinson interview. Sorry. When I announced the Tommy Robin interview, there was a substantial meltdown from usual Islamists and leftists. I don't particularly care about the views of those who platform ISIS and Al Qaeda supporters and deny the Hindu media that exists globally. However, after I conducted the interview, I got SOS calls from British Hindus who believed that the Islamists would use this interview to target them physically and justify their attack. I don't like this reasoning, but they are the victims and their opinion has to be respected. The global media, being sympathetic to Islamists, will play along and vilify the diaspora. I would not want Hindus abroad and their physical safety to be compromised. I don't believe Tommy Robinson was trying to hijack the issue. I also don't think that the left will ever be sympathetic to the Hindu cause, no matter who the Hindus disassociate with. However, I am going to respect the opinion of British Hindus who are genuinely scared for their safety and reputation due to the left media in the UK and defer the release of the interview. This was a statement I had put out back in September. It has been 3 months and I have now decided to release the interview. The Hindus were branded white supremacists in several international media outlets despite the interview being on hold. I also believe that Tommy deserves to be heard, and people should make up their own minds whether they like them, whether they hate them, whether they agree with them or not. Now, before someone again starts imagining things that are simply not there, I would like to reiterate that I am doing this as a journalist and as someone who believes that labels shouldn't be used to silence voices. I don't make any claims to speak for any group of Hindus either in UK or back in India. However, I am speaking for myself and am allowing Tommy to speak for himself. I would urge all of you to watch this interview and make up your own mind. It's been deferred by 3 months, and today is the 31st of December 2022. I did not want to end this year with this baggage on my shoulder that I am one of those journalists who would withhold an interview from being aired simply because the global left wanted me to. So here it is. Make up your own mind, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Op India. Today, I have Mr. Tommy Robinson with me, one of UK's foremost activists. As far as talking about radical Islam and Islamism is concerned, I would not want to call him all the names that Wikipedia and all other leftists like to call him, which is Nazi, fascist, white supremacist, white nationalist, anti Islam, anti Muslim, so on and so forth. Now, my aim to talk to Tommy today was, of course, to talk about the Leicester violence and what the Hindus could do. We have had back and forth conversations when he was not deplatformed by Twitter, but then we lost touch, and I finally got in touch with him again on Getter after the Leicester violence, and he was very keen on helping the Hindus as well. However, something very strange happened when I mentioned on Twitter that I would be speaking to Tommy. Leftists from across the globe, including Indian, started attacking me and abusing me for platforming a white supremacist, a racist, a Nazi, a fascist, and so on and so forth, saying that these white supremacists are no friends of Hindus and they are using Hindus simply to further their Islamophobic trope. Now, my viewers are well aware of what I think about the term Islamophobia. Phobia is an irrational fear, but fearing the knife and the sword of the Islamist is not irrational. But since I've got this backlash, I would deviate a little from Leicester in the beginning and talk to Tommy about his background and about the history of his activism. So, welcome, Tommy. Thank you for speaking to us. And it's good to know that somebody gets abused far more than I do, even in India.
It's simple attempts to silence you. That's all it is. All of those labels you listed, every bit of evidence goes totally against them. I despise white supremacy. I despise Nazis. I despise racism. Even the fact of anti-Muslim. I am not anti-Muslim. Okay. I tell the truth about Islam. Muslims, I believe, are victims of Islam. I believe they need freedom from Islam. I separate the people from the idea. Muslims are people, Islam's an idea. It's a very bad idea. It's an idea that brings lots of problems, lots of carnage wherever it is, lots of misery, lots of pain and suffering. So I talk about it and I talk against it. I talk based on facts, which no one can deal with usually, which is why they deplatform you. I tell the truth from my heart each time and tell an experience of life. I've grown up in a town called Luton Town. When I was born in 1982, we had one mosque. We now have 45. So 50% of the town roughly is Pakistani Muslim. So I can firsthand tell, and in that town I'm a son of immigrants. My mother was an Irish immigrant. Most of my friends are St. Lucian, Jamaican, Bulgarian, Italian. We're all sons of immigrants, yeah? Indian. I can tell how multiculturalism works and what parts of it don't work. So I can tell from my life experience, rather than what I've read in a book, I can tell from the experience of growing up in a largely Muslim populated town, the problems that brings, the attacks on freedom, what you can and can't say, which many in Leicester are currently receiving or on the back end of. So, yeah, so all of the accusations against me, they're false. They don't want to hear the truth. I was so happy that I saw many of your Indian followers who will remember me from before I was deplatformed, who were supporting me and having my back and saying that they've watched me since 2009, 2010, and they're fully aware I'm not racist, and they know that they know who I am and what I stand for. Unfortunately, for the big tech and for the corporations, there's still many that remember, rather than being told who I am, because now they just want to tell everyone who I am, rather than let people make their own mind up. So all of your followers need to get over on Getter. And give me a
follow. So, Tommy, if we can go back to your EDL days for a moment. Yep. You have been beaten, mobbed, incarcerated. You've gone to jail for taking a stand against the grooming gangs in UK. Yep. Your family has been attacked. I don't know how your kids and your wife cope with it. But if we could go back to EDL and talk about why EDL came to be, and why you left the organization, what it stood for, and what it became a little bit. So everybody has context as to where you come from. I was watching your Oxford Union talk, yes, and I did notice that you said that your cousin was unfortunately the victim of one of these grooming gangs, even before we knew what grooming gangs are. So if you could talk a little about that, where you come from and why you walked down this path of activism.
So, because of everything I'd seen growing up, as you've quoted, I had a relative who was a victim of these gangs, but I know many girls who are victims of these Pakistani Muslim gangs. In India, you call it love jihad. Okay, in the UK, we give it a nice name called grooming. What we're talking about is rape jihad. That's what we're talking about. They're talking about kidnapping people's daughters and taking them, and that's happening across our country, as many people now know. I'd witnessed it. It was one thing after another, and it was time to form a resistance to it. We formed an organisation called the English Defence League. It was a broad organisation. The purpose was to highlight the problems that Islam brings. We focused solely on Islam. We had a Sikh division, a Hindu division. We had a lesbian and gay division. We had divisions that would incorporate everyone in the ambition of uniting people, because that's the only way we fight this. The only way we will defeat this is to unite everyone who's affected from the aggression that's going to come from the Islamists and the Islamic ideology. So that was our movement. We formed, and straight away, every single demonstration we had, remember, we were the largest street protest movement in Europe. We had thousands and thousands marching through the streets, screaming for help against what was happening. And at every demonstration, we had a non-white speaker. At every demonstration, yeah. One of the leaders at the start was a man called Gurumit Singh. I like to call him Menacing Singh. He's a great friend. He was one of the leaders of the English Defence League. Contrary to what the media would ever want you to know or see, they would always take a picture of lots of young, angry white men. And that is what they're portrayed to the world as our organisation. But what we stood for, we made it very clear from start to finish what we stood for and what our cause was. And unfortunately, I left the English Defence League in 2015. I then went into journalism. I found that we need to reach people in their homes. I want everyone to see what I've seen. I want everyone to know what I know. I want to help educate and help people understand the dangers that Islam's going to bring. I hope Muslims understand, because I think many Muslims are naive of the agenda of Islam. Many Muslims don't understand the Quran. They don't understand who Muhammad was. We can get onto who he was and the problems that brings. But yeah, that was my activism. So, and because of that activism, I've been deplatformed from every social media. I've not committed one crime. I've never been arrested for any race hate, any hate crime, any religious incident, nothing. Yeah, I've not been convicted of any of those crimes. Yet I'm deplatformed from every single social media. Not just deplatformed, but if you say my name on Facebook, you get deplatformed. You can't even say my name. So, and what crime have I committed? And no one can refute the arguments I bring. I've had debate after debate on every TV show. And in the end, they had to stop inviting me on because the public were listening and they were understanding. And we were causing an awakening, which is the last thing they want. So, yeah, that's my activism. And my activism from the start, I formed a good relationship with many in India when I had social media. I was surprised, actually. I think it was about 15% of my following online was coming out of India. I've watched the politics in India. I believe that the election of Modi was the start of a populist revolution. People talk about Trump and the globalists and the plan, and big tech got worried by Trump. It started in India. And then it went to Trump and anyone, Brazil's leader, anyone who has gone against them is under attack and labelled as extreme or racist or far right. They're now labelling the Hindus. The Hindus are being labelled in Leicester as the aggressors and as far right. Again, we'll get onto that when we talk about what's happening in Leicester, because it's insanity. And anyone who researches or understands what's going on, it's actually laughable that they're attempting to do that. So that's my history.
So, Tommy, I think the labels the left puts on you and the Islamists put on you comes from the basic fact that you stood in part against multiculturalism as well. And you had a strong anti-immigration stand. If you could explain what you believe as far as multiculturalism and anti-immigration is concerned.
I've never been anti-immigration. I've only been against Islamic immigration. So if I was anti-immigration, that would have prevented my mother coming here. It would have prevented most of the people I love coming into this country. So I'm for controlled immigration, for legal immigration, and I'm against Islamic immigration. And when we talk about multiculturalism, I've always said that it hasn't failed. I've said that by saying Angela Merkel said multiculturalism's failed, David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of our country, said multiculturalism failed. That is a weak and cowardice way of saying Islam's failed, because the Jewish community, the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the West Indian community, none of these communities have failed to integrate into British society. We can look, even if we're looking at Hindus or Sikhs, for example, they are the best business owners percentage in the country. They are the most successful, the most to go to university, the most property owners percentage. So they are a perfect example of how immigration can work. They are patriotic. They are still very religious, but they're not empowering it or pushing it on the rest of the country or asking or demanding for changes. So I've never said multiculturalism's failed. I've actually said the opposite. I've said that Islam's failed and we must... it's a similar way. When they say multiculturalism, that's blaming everyone else. The same when they called these rape gangs Asian. That was to blame everyone else. Now, we fought for years. We fought for years to have them identified as they are. They are Muslim rape gangs, or the men are Muslim, okay? And the driving force for the reason they're doing it, the justification for why they're doing it, can come from the scripture of the Quran. It can come from their intolerance of non-Muslims. And that is why, if we're on I'll save it till we get totally onto the rape gangs, because I'll do a whole discussion on that. But yeah, that's my stance on immigration. I think that I look at Germany, and I know that Germany needed to bring in immigrants because of the declining birth rate to fill their pensions. They opened the borders to 2 million Muslims who will not work, as we see, will not integrate, as we see, predominantly. They should have opened the borders to Hindus. They should have opened the borders to Sikhs. There's so many other migrants they could have brought in who would be a benefit to their society.
So what I understand is you saying that the Muslim community as a whole, they assimilate with a lot of difficulty, or they don't assimilate at all with the local population. And therefore, you were for controlled immigration specifically of the Muslim community, and you were not against immigration of any other community, including the Hindu community.
Totally. I'm saying that per se, look, I know some great Muslims, yeah, that I've grown up with in Luton. But in general, the community isolates itself. It doesn't assimilate at all. And it doesn't just not assimilate, but the percentages, if we look at we have over 22,000 Muslims on a terrorist watch list. Yeah, we spend 9 billion a year monitoring 3,000 of them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they're ready to commit terrorism on us. The same can't be said about any other community. It's just not. The problems that come from the Islamic community are so vast, are growing so quick, are so dangerous for the country that it has to be addressed. And I even say, I'm not saying you have to end Islamic immigration forever, but we have to deal with the problem we now have in Europe. We now have this problem here. We need to deal with it, and we certainly need to understand it. And if you can't question it without being labelled a Nazi, a white supremacist, or an Islamophobe and deplatformed from everywhere, then we're not going to be able to deal with it. And the problem is getting worse and worse and worse. The new generation of Muslims are more radical and more extreme per se than the previous generations that come to this country for a better life. So the problem isn't going in the right direction. We must talk about it, and we must try and halt it, which is what I talk about.
Right. Before we move on to the grooming gangs and what happened in Leicester, I would like to address one question. Everything I've asked you so far is essentially a question from the Islamists and leftists, because I think our interaction has been so cordial always that I never really thought you were a racist. And I've seen you stand up for the Hindu community over the past many years. So I had no doubts, but I needed to hear that from you, and the audience needs to hear that from you. However, one question from the Hindu community.
Yep.
Often we've seen that the conservatives, whether they're from the UK or from the USA, they do align with Hindus as far as anti-Islamism is concerned. However, there's always a point of deflection where there is a bit of a loss of trust. I'll cite an example. Like recently, Tucker Carlson, after the death of the Queen of England, he went on to justify British colonialism in India, which, pardon my saying so, but it robbed India of everything that it had. It enslaved our people, it pushed our people into slavery and famine. And that sort of broke a little bit of that trust that the Indian or / the Hindu community had when Mr. Carlson was talking about these conservative ideas that a lot of people in India identified with. So I think, most Hindus would wonder, why do you sort of support the Hindus? And what is your idea of why the Hindus need to be supported? Because Hinduism is an extremely diverse religion. It's not a religion of the book, say, like Islam or Christianity. And therefore, we find that many people from the West have a bit of a difficulty understanding where Hindus come from. So, why do you think Hindus should be supported?
I think that one of the biggest mistakes of the British Empire was to partition India, was to create Pakistan. We created a terrorist state, a backward terrorist state that springs problems from the world now come from Pakistan. I think that I don't want to glorify anything throughout our history. When I look at what's our current history. I look at the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, which is all unjustified and based on lies. Yeah. I look at the fact that our governments were going to those countries to rob them, of their wealth. And I'm totally against it. And so I don't trust now. The situation I'm at now when I look at my country and I look at my government is I'm ashamed and embarrassed of, and when I look through our foreign policy and our historical foreign policy, it's embarrassing and disgusting. I'm a patriot. I love my country. Yeah. I despise many of the actions that our government have done. Whether it be invading countries, whether it be controlling companies, robbing the wealth from countries, whether it be a million Muslims being killed in invasions, over lies, to further a globalist agenda for wealth and for the elite to get more money and become more powerful and more control. I despise what's happening now in Ukraine. I despise the fact that our government are sending billions to fight in Russia rather than trying to stop that conflict. So I'm totally against war. I don't want to glorify any past, but I believe Hindus, when I look at Hindus in the UK, I know many Hindus. The Hindu population, I believe, is roughly 2% of the UK. When it comes to a prison population of criminals, of thugs, of violence, it's literally 0%. Now, Muslims make up 4% of the UK population. They make up roughly 20%, between 18 and 20% of the prison population. Okay, so when we see a conflict like what's happening in Leicester, I know, and anyone who knows this country knows that per se, Pakistani Muslims are aggressors. They are into selling heroin. They control drugs. They control violence. They bring a whole new level of violence and of hostility and aggression that Hindus, I believe, are ready to do. As a peaceful, peace-loving migrant community, I saw someone say, I saw a comment on my own live stream saying, if the Hindus are fighting the Muslims, leave them to it. Yeah. And I said, that's never been what I see as part of being British. Okay. What I see as part of being British is to defend the vulnerable. And I see currently, at the minute, with what's happening, you saw it in Birmingham last night, I see peaceful Hindus who are probably out of their league when it comes to their youth, in comparison to the aggression that's going to be put at them by the controlled, armed and violent gangs of Pakistani Muslims. Now, if the police are going to stand by, which we've witnessed, not just stand by, but try and turn the tables and somehow blame the Hindu community. When anyone who does 10 minutes of research on this issue, anyone who looks into it, I said, if you look through, it's like, and the problem why I believe they do it every time is to divert the attention. We're hearing this is about cricket. We're hearing this about cricket. I said, if we could go back and get Emperor Aurangzeb and we asked him, why did you genocide millions of Muslims? Why did you rape their women? Was it over politics? What was it over? It's over scripture. It comes from scripture directly. Yeah. So whether we go to the Mumbai terrorists and we ask them why they decided to attack India, whether we go to all the victims in India who have been driven from their homes from aggressive Muslim mobs and we speak to them, it's not over cricket. Stop trying to pretend this is a 1400-year issue, okay? And it's rearing its head, and we're only seeing it now because it's reared its head there. But let's face it, Hindus are being oppressed and attacked, as are Sikhs, in this country. You might not read about it on the news every day. I know if we talk about Leicester, let's just stick on the one city of Leicester. Recently, last year, 2 Sikh boys were walking home from school. Gangs of Muslims come, they rip their turbans off and they beat them. What was the reason for that? Was it cricket? No. We know what it was. It was religious intolerance driven by, and again, they hate to do it. And this is what each time when I talk about it, I say, what is it? What is it driven by? What is this? Where does this hatred come from? If we went through all of the conflicts, Surah 9:5, When the sacred months have passed, kill the non-Muslims wherever you find them. Capture them and besiege them and lie in wait at every ambush. That's what it says in the Quran. And if we want to go for context, so some people say, oh, you're just quoting the Quran out of context. If we go to Ibn Kathir is one of the world's most renowned Islamic scholars, the most recognized. How does he give context on things like this? He makes it clear. Allah commands Muslims to fight the mushrikin. What does that translate as? The idolaters. So are Hindus idolaters? So there is. The Quran commands Muslims in the sword verses to kill non-Muslims wherever they find them. Mushrin in Arabic simply means idolaters. Ibn Kathir tells us what that means. Shirk, idolatry, is the most evil of all sins in Islam. All four of these can be used. I'm not saying they are every time, but they can be used and they are used as religious justifications to wage war, jihad, and attacks against Hindus. Hindus fit every one of these descriptions given by Scripture, as do Christians. Okay, now many of the Muslims explain, which I've seen. You've seen Muhammad hijab. You've seen the mocking. He's mocking the religion. Yeah, it's religious what they're doing. The lies coming out from the so-called journalists coming out saying the Hindus were shouting, kill the Muslims. No, they weren't. That doesn't translate what they were saying is kill the Muslims. Each thing, and the problem is, which it frustrates me. It does frustrate me because people who just pick up their news and the media are now being lied to in the UK about the British Hindu community. And it's important that people speak up against that lie, because if you're just an ordinary British person and you're now picking up the media, you'll be believing, coming from politicians, coming from police, you'll be believing that somehow the Hindus are at fault here. Somehow Hindu men coming together after days and days of attacks to stand together and say enough is enough. They're not aggressors. They're coming out to defend their women, to defend their community. In Leicester, while we're on Leicester again, about in 2000 and I'd say it was 15, I'd have to check the dates. When was I in jail? 2015, roughly. A Sikh girl was kidnapped. She was taken to a Muslim-owned business in Leicester. She was gang raped. She was taken to a property. She was gang raped. She was anally raped by gangs and gangs of Muslim men. The Sikh community come together. They have been forced to form resistance, Shula Punjab, SP. They have been forced to get men from temples together. Unfortunately, this is how it is, to protect their women. Those men come together. The family went to the police. The police did nothing. When the police did nothing, the Sikh men come into Leicester, and they went to the businesses where the girl had been raped. And there was violence at the businesses. Then the police officer come out and he stood on national TV and he said there are unfounded rumors about Muslims grooming and raping girls. He lied because after the attack by the Sikhs, the police then arrested the Muslims and they were convicted of raping the girl. Yeah, but as you're seeing now, the police will bend the truth. Why did they bend the truth in Leicester? Why did they stand on the TV and did they say that they were unfounded rumours? Because they were worried. They were worried about the reaction because they know, like we're seeing now, it's spread to Birmingham. Yeah, we saw last night 200 Muslim men surround an innocent temple. They're burning flags of Hindu temples in cities. Now, the thing that's frustrating, if this was any other community, if anyone went near a Muslim mosque, and I'll give you an example. A lad called Bunny from Bristol put a bacon sandwich outside a mosque. Stupid idea. Yeah, he got 2 years in prison. He was killed in British prison for that. Now, 200 men. We have hate crime laws in this country. 200 men specifically targeted an innocent Hindu temple last night in Birmingham, wearing balaclavas, screaming Allah Akbar. It fits every criteria of a hate incident and a hate crime. Yeah? Muhammad hijab has incited hatred against Hindus. He's mocked Hindus. He's targeted the religion. He has incited and demanded that Muslims rise up from all over the country. 50% of the arrests of the men arrested in Leicester, the Muslim men, are not from Leicester. So the problem at the minute is that Leicester's Hindus are being left in there without adequate police protection. And they're being left and Muslims are coming from towns and cities from everywhere to attack them. And what I've said, and I made a call last night to representatives in Leicester and Hindu representatives to say, I have been inundated with Englishmen, not neo-Nazis, not fascists, Englishmen who are watching, who value the Hindu community, who value the benefit they bring to this country, and who don't want to see them targeted, and who don't want to allow what's happening. And unfortunately, the media, I saw this journalist yesterday, the media, they just bend the truth and they lie and they want to push the blame, just as they did with Asian grooming gangs. The blame is always pushed. Because if we investigate the justification or why this is coming from, where does this hatred come from? It comes from the scripture. It comes from the book. It comes from the teachings of Muhammad. And all of it is justified within Islam, even down to the fact that there is no law, the only law is Allah's law, even down to that and the intolerance of that. So, yeah, I just find it, I'm watching, I've watched, I've bit my tongue, I've had lads, I obviously, from my activism, I have group chats with lads in every city in the country, and all of them are saying, when are we going to Leicester? Now, if I thought it benefited, which is what I've been waiting to hear from the Hindus from Leicester, I'd bring hundreds of men to Leicester tomorrow. But no one wants mass conflict on the streets. We don't want it. I'm sure the Hindu community will be, if whatever happens in Leicester now, the Hindu community are going to be left to live in Leicester. I heard last night that there's many Hindu families now who have fled Leicester. We've got Hindu refugees now, Hindu refugees in Leicester, being driven from their home in Leicester, in the United Kingdom, in England, by Islamist extremist gangs, whilst the police stand there and watch. And it's frustrating and it angers me. So, yeah, it angers me. And it's hard to know what's best to do, because if 200 Englishmen turn up at the temples to help defend the temples, does it inflame it? Does my presence bring more Muslims there? It's hard to know the right move. I've offered and spoke to Hindus to say that there's many people who are wanting to and willing to help defend. No one wants to see them target the way they are. And I think that I have an important role. You have an important role. Everyone has an important role to use their platform to make sure that the British public are fully aware that the Hindus are not the aggressors in this. Yeah, the Hindus are not the aggressors. They have a right to come out and try and defend themselves when they're under attack. But the hostility they're facing, and it's nothing. And the other point is, it's nothing new. It's nothing. It might be new to some people going, what's going on? But we know, anyone in India knows. We know where the aggression comes from. So
I think at this point, of course, the Leicester Hindus are the best judge of what to do moving forward. But I think it's extremely important through you for the British public to understand how the Hindu community is being branded as Hindu nationalists, as far right, as Nazis, as fascists. Basically, all the words that they've used for you as well are being used for the Hindu community, largely because they perceive any Hindu who is not self-loathing as somebody who supports Prime Minister Modi, and as somebody who must be neutralized.
But what's wrong with supporting Prime Minister Modi? What's wrong? What's wrong with that? I don't think people should be pushed or ashamed from identifying as supporting him anyway. I admire Prime Minister Modi. I know there's problems within India, but I don't see the problem with that. And I don't think people should be even forced into self-censoring support either. And that's what happens, and that's how they have everyone. But you're right; they're being branded as far-right extremists and Hindu nationalists, and it's exactly what we've faced. So most of the British public are fully aware of these labels. They've sort of bored of them now, and I'm pretty certain. In fact, I'm certain that the vast majority of pretty much everyone, other than people ideologically driven, other than communist Marxists or the far left who align themselves with the Islamists, yeah. Other than these groups, the British public will want to and will, if need to, stand side by side with the Hindu community.
Yeah. I think the problem also is that the labels have very different meanings in different nations. For example, nationalism in India, especially Hindu nationalism, is essentially based on trying to preserve the civilizational values that Hindus have had. It's a 5,000-year-old civilization. It's not just a political nation that was carved when the British left. And therefore, these terms are not really being understood by a lot of people who view any sort of resistance to Islamic aggression and any sort of resistance to altering that civilizational foundation that Hindus have, which is a 5,000-year-old ancient civilization as some sort of fascism and some sort of aping the neo-Nazis, for example. And which is the problem. I think every individual, whether they're Hindus, whether people like you, are branded if they speak out against Islamic atrocities.
Well, they've made nationalism a dirty word.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. They've successfully, through the use of the media, through their stereotyping and through their fear campaigns and smear campaigns, they've made nationalist a dirty word, and it's not a dirty word at all.
Yeah.
Whether you're a Hindu nationalist, whether you're a British nationalist, nationalism is not dirty, but they've made it that way. Well, they've made it seem that way through the media. But I say again that the majority of the people don't agree with it. So,
Yeah.
but the only problem we have is, before I would have made a video like this, when I had social media, I had 1.2 million people on Facebook. When I went live, 30,000 people would sign in. We had the platform to give all the education, to give all the evidence, to talk to people. They've taken that from us. Yeah, they've taken it from us because they know with a reach at the minute, they now have the monopoly. They have the monopoly on what they're telling people is happening in Leicester. They don't want us. They don't want you. They don't want me. Yeah? I'm surprised you still have a platform, because they've taken ours, which is why in this battle ahead, it is massively important to migrate people, to try and migrate the British public. I saw a lot of the comments under your video saying, Tommy Robinson, I thought he died. Where has he been? I've been on Getter. I've been making films. I've probably done more activism and more work now than I was doing previously. So in tackling these issues, the only problem, and the bit of the disheartening thing, is we don't reach the numbers we were. But as time goes on, Getter is the fastest growing social media platform. We're on Telegram. Truth Social is getting bigger in America. We need alternative platforms, and we need to migrate Indian audiences from the mainstream social media, the ones that are telling you Hindu is bad, the ones that are telling you you're far right.
Tommy, what's interesting? So when I was researching all your latest work, I went onto YouTube, and all your altercations in Britain when you were doing your activism, all of that is still there. The one video that I couldn't find was your interaction with Imam Tawhidi.
Yep.
That video I simply could not find. And it was so interesting to me that they don't mind, showing you getting beaten, getting mobbed. They don't mind your Oxford Union speech being there and all of that. What they mind is your interaction with Imam Tawhidi, because that would sort of bust the entire propaganda of Islamophobia, because there is an Imam sitting and talking to you about the problems with Islam and Islamism. That's the one video I couldn't find. When I messaged you that, could you please direct me to that video, because I can't find it.
Well, it's not just that one. What they've done is, the only videos you find, so you search my name, are the negative videos. Right. And the ones at the top are all their videos. Whereas they used to be my videos, where I'd have an opportunity to defend myself, to give people the facts, to show them video evidence. The Oxford Union one is the only positive video, really, that's still there, and that's because it's on the Oxford Union website, and it's the biggest debate society in the world. It's the most prestigious, and it would be embarrassing if the Oxford University were forced to delete one of their videos. But pretty much the rest of them, all of my opportunity to give my name, people just get told who I am now, unfortunately, and it's a worrying time, because all of those labels you just labelled, they don't define who I am. They're nothing to do with me. I'm a proud Brit. I love my country. I love it, and I want to defend it. I've got 3 beautiful children, and I want them to grow up in a safe and prosperous Britain. And the growth of Islam is a danger to that. And what we're seeing, if you look at the demographics in Leicester, is whereas it was a predominantly Hindu city, the Muslim community are now growing to such a state. And we all know, and you know, and anyone in India knows, and everyone knows, when it gets to a certain demographic, they know what's going to happen. It's going to happen. So how do we stop it? We don't stop it by not talking about it. We don't stop it by being cowards. We don't stop it by pretending everything's okay. Because that's what the politicians want to do. They want to pretend, we all live in harmony. No, we don't. No, they're aggressive. They're hostile. Okay? They're pumping heroin into our communities. They're raping our daughters. Okay? And we're supposed to just tolerate it. Well, no. And that's since 2009, that's what I've been saying is, no, we will not remain silent anymore. And it doesn't matter. Islam rules with fear. Yeah? You show them fear, you pander to them, you cower to them, they will jump all over you. Yeah? So you have to stand up. And even if it means standing up with your mouth and with your words and speaking, and telling the truth. And that is our job, to tell the truth. That's why I'm happy to tell my supporters the truth of what the Hindu community are like, of how great they are as a community. I've always done it with the Sikhs as well. I think it's totally unfair that they're categorized as Asian. We must separate that. We must understand the differences and show support at times like this. You're totally right. It's down to the Hindu community in Leicester, because when people come into Leicester and leave, they'll be left there. Yeah, so it is down to the people in Leicester. They know. But did I hear last night that over 100 families have left Leicester?
So there is an NGO called Insight UK.
Yep.
And when I spoke to them, they had told me that about 200 families have been possibly displaced and are scared to go back to Leicester. 200 Hindu families. That's what they tell me.
That is not acceptable. Yeah. It's not acceptable now. It's not acceptable in England. And if 200 Muslim families were displaced, it would be world news. Everyone would be screaming from their rooftops. There would already be thousands of people traveling to that city. All the left wing would be traveling there. Or the far left activists. But unfortunately for Hindus, because they're not feared. That's the problem. They're not feared. So they're just... they're allowing it to happen. They don't know how to deal. It's the same with the riots in Bradford. It's the same with the grooming gangs. Let's look at the grooming gangs. They allowed gangs of Muslim men to kidnap English kids, to kidnap Hindu kids, Sikh kids. I actually went, when I was at a Hindu temple in London for a seminar by Sikh Awareness Society. It was an educational seminar that I attended. This is going back 4 or 5 years, where the Hindu to teach, where they were teaching the telling signs of these gangs to prevent them taking your daughters. And the police knew it was happening, but why did the police not do anything? Because they didn't want to be deemed as racist. Now, this is the same. You take that and you implement them ideas, which are still happening across the country, into Leicester. Why won't the police come out and tell the truth about what's happening in that city? They're scared. Because they know the Muslims will come and set fire. One Muslim's been arrested with a firearm. Muslims, you see them at the video of the Muslim with a knife stabbing. They've got knives that they will inflict a new level of violence. And Hindus, unfortunately, are in the firing line at the minute. But when Hindus aren't in the firing line, some poor other community are, some innocent girl is. As I said, it's love jihad in India. Every city faces that now in this country. Every city is facing it. And every community.
Yeah, so since we're talking about the police, Again, when I was watching your Oxford Union speech, you showed this video where during your EDL days, there was this protest by Islamists and they were burning the British flag and they were saying death to UK and death to the British police, etc. And there was a snapshot, there was a portion where you jumped over the barricade, the fence, and you grabbed the black Islamic flag, which has now come to be known as the ISIS flag.
Yep.
And you were then arrested for assault on the police, in fact, when you hadn't assaulted the police. And then later, they wanted to incarcerate you for troubling the Muslims, for creating some sort of a trauma to the Muslim community when you grabbed that flag.
Yep.
So the police, of course, did not act as they should have in your case. When we look at the Telford grooming gangs, again, they did not act as they should have. They did not catch the perpetrators because they were scared of being branded racist. And therefore, thousands of these young girls who were white girls, Sikhs, Hindus, etc., they were being raped and they were being groomed by these Muslim Pakistani gangs. And then again in Leicester, we see that the police is turning around and trying to blame the Hindu community. We've seen people like Muhammad Hijab. We've seen people like Majid Freeman who have not been touched by the police, when there is ample evidence that Majid Freeman spread fake news that ended up endangering the Hindu community. There is enough evidence that Muhammad Hijab went on a rant against Hindus and told the Muslims to congregate and harm the Hindus. So how do you explain this sort of persistent conduct of the police in UK, whether it's an individual like yourself who is, a Brit, whether it's about young girls who are, white kids, who are Sikhs, who are Hindus, or if, communal clash or communal violence like in Leicester, where a Muslim mob is going after Hindus, burning their homes, stabbing Hindus, what have you, and even attacking temples. So how do you explain this conduct by the police?
Fearful. They're scared for many reasons. It goes the highest ranking police officers are not police officers; they're more politicians. Our police force has become politicized massively. When you look at the Muslim community, they organize themselves in a military fashion in lots of different ways, including voting. For vote bank politics, they organise themselves. They're told who to vote for by their mosques. Say like Luton, I remember when we had 30 mosques, we had the council of mosques, one leader who represented the 30 mosques, and he does the deals with our local councils, our local government, and then they're told who to vote for. Yeah, literally like that, and they will go and do it. So in cities like Leicester, where they have large Muslim communities, that's a powerful sway to have over police and politically elected leaders. So we know of an extremist organisation called MEND. MEND is an extremist Islamist terror supporting organisation. Yeah? Now, in Greater Manchester, even though they're extremists, there was a speech given where they were giving speech with Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham is the mayor of Manchester, a future Labour leader of our Labour Party. He's sharing a platform with this group. They say in their talk, they now control the seats of 15 seats because the close-knit voting banks, they can sway them either way. So he laughs. He says all the political parties will talk to us. Yeah. So they will use our democracy to end our democracy, basically, and that's how they organise themselves. And they also organise themselves. And as you've seen, as the Hindu community have seen, they can get hundreds out in the streets like that. Yeah, which is always used as a threat by their leaders. We won't be able to control the youth. And then the leaders sit there and they negotiate and get more concessions on everything. Yeah, more money, more concessions, more allowability on whatever they want, using the threat every time of violence. Let's face it, the Hindu community are never going to do that. We know that. We know that's not. And Muhammad Hijab says it in his speech. Yeah, in Leicester, he says you're not about that life. Yeah, and he's right because they're not criminals. They're not thugs. They're not terrorists. They're not extremists. They're not going to use severe violence on innocent people. But what he's telling you is we will. Yeah. And they will inflict it against non-Muslims. And we know that. You know that. Unfortunately, lots of people know that. I wish we had a Tapan Ghosh in the United Kingdom at the minute. I met him a few years ago before he passed away. But you do need to form some sort of resistance because people's innocent Hindu families cannot be left in their homes while their windows are getting smashed in and their families dragged out of their homes and stabbed. Whilst the police, look at the police's response. Look at what they're wearing. If that was at a football game, they would be fully riot geared up and they'd be beating people. Have you seen one video of them going into the Muslim community at all? Even when they're beating people up and attacking people or setting fire to temples, and the police are standing there, they don't even react. They're too scared to deal with it. It's why the English Defence League formed originally, because of the police response in Luton, where they didn't deal with the terrorists. They let them recruit, they let them radicalise, they let them attack our soldiers, they let them do whatever they want. And that is the two-tier policing system. And unfortunately, right now, times like this sometimes are beneficial to awaken many people to where we're at. There's a two-tier policing system that I've spoke about for 15 years now. There's iron fists for every other community, and there's kid gloves for the Islamic community. Unfortunately, now many Hindus in Leicester now realise that's a reality. And I hope that your leaders in Leicester do not submit or back down and pretend that these problems aren't there, as so many will be asking them to. The problems need to be addressed. But the thing is, I know that the Muslim community in Leicester per se are Indian, which are not as problematic per se as the Pakistanis with the aggression, which is why a lot of the aggression that's coming in right now and it's exploding in Leicester is being imported into Leicester as well. They're travelling from all over the country. Birmingham, that would be all Pakistanis outside that Indian temple last night, guarantee you, directing their hate and their against an innocent temple and innocent people inside. I watched the video. Did you watch the video where they're all on the... How terrifying would that be for anyone inside that temple? How outrageous is that action? How outrageous is their behaviour? And how outrageous is it that is not massive news or talking point in this country right now, that Hindus are being targeted in this way? And not just that it's not a talking point, but that they're lying about it and they're trying to blame Hindus.
So the problem seems to be twofold. One is, of course, the policing system in UK, and the other is the media. That seems to be not showing the truth at all. For example, The Guardian took Majid Freeman, who is an ISIS and Al Qaeda supporter. He has traveled to Syria. He has openly espoused terrorist activity. He has openly said that British Muslims need to commit jihad. And he was the one who was directing their reporter in Leicester to sort of explain to her what is happening in the area. And the narrative that came forward was that Hindus were extremists because they chanted their religious slogan, which is Jai Shri Ram, in the vicinity of a mosque when they were taking out a protest march against earlier violence by Islamists. And therefore, the Muslims got provoked and attacked the Hindus. So, giving it an undertone of justification that it was the Hindus who provoked the Muslims simply because they crossed a mosque when they were protesting, and therefore all the violence against the Hindus is justified.
Right.
And this is coming out from Guardian, from BBC, basically from the entire British media. So how do you see this problem playing out? Because the entire British media seems to be demonizing the Hindu community in Britain.
Welcome to where we've been. Okay, so you see what they like. You're not, the Hindu community in Leicester are seeing what they do. Yeah. So when you read the headlines about me, question them because you know they're lying. Okay, look at the sources they use. Yeah, they don't care that he's an extremist. They don't care that he's a radical. And the problem is, you couldn't cross a road in Leicester without going near a mosque. And those men that come out and were chanting was only in response to days of violent attacks anyway. So the justification, the lies that are spread, and it was always to portray the Islamic community as the victims. Even the commentary, I've been watching the videos, it's like, but again, anyone with half a brain who does research, anyone who understands Hinduism or Hindus and understands Islam and the Islamic community in the UK, we know who the aggressors are. The most important thing is getting the message out to the British public. Most people don't trust the BBC. The least trust, by a European survey, the least trust in media is in Great Britain. It's not in former communist countries. It's in Great Britain. We do not trust them. It's why I become the most watched journalist in Europe, in the world at one point, 60 million views in 4 weeks. That was a reason why, because people want to hear the truth and they want to hear it without tiptoeing around or being scared about offending someone's feelings. Telling the truth about Islam, as they say as well, war is deceit, and they are very good at it. They are very good at it. They're very, very good at portraying themselves, whether it be after a terrorist attack or after any incident, as the victims. Even after the rape gangs, the Islamic community was still portrayed as the victims. 1,000 of our daughters are raped in one town and you're the victims? You know what they want to hide? This is the other point. In Telford, I concentrated on Telford. Now, Leicester has a large Muslim population, and I've already spoke about the Sikh case there. People need to go and research that case. I've made 4 films. My box set is called The Rape of Britain, and I specifically looked at Telford. Telford has a 1.7% Muslim population. The police investigation found that over 1,000 girls were targeted. 5 girls were murdered. Okay, 5 girls were murdered. This has been going on for 40 years. In that one town, the police identified over 200 Muslims that were involved. My investigation identified 240. We had the names, addresses, and locations of 240 men who had been raping our kids. An independent inquiry in that town by a solicitor's firm identified over 300. Now, when you take the 1.7% Muslim population and you get rid of the women, and then you get rid of the under 16s and the over 70s, you are left with roughly 1,000 men who are of the age that could be involved in these rapes. Now, the police identified 200 of them. So we know it's a minimum 200 of those men in that town have been raping kids. That is 20%. 20% of the Islamic community are raping children. 20%. These are the numbers they don't want you understanding. They don't want you, and the only 2 cities in the country that you would have heard of, I guess, Rotherham. You've heard of the rapes in Rotherham? Why do we know about Rotherham and why do we know about Telford? Rotherham has a 3.7% Muslim population. Telford a 1.7. There's no Muslims there. Okay. Bradford has a 50%. Luton, Birmingham, we never get the statistics. We never hear of these gangs. We see little handfuls of arrests. But the true scale of this problem is still being hidden. And that's what they don't want you to know. And the reason they don't want you to know it is because we're currently still importing 1,000 through our border every day of illegal Islamic migrants coming from countries like Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Pakistan. Now, if we take the mindset of the men in these countries, it's, again, not my opinion. None of this is my opinion. Yeah, I'm just going on statistics, numbers, facts, scripture. Take the way Muslim men think of women. And this is from what they say in their surveys, what they think of homosexuals, what they think of freedom of speech. Okay, we can see that what you're attempting to do is mix oil and water. And that is evident in every city across the UK of an Islamic community. And that is why I say we need to stop it. We need to talk about it. We need to prevent a future of chaos for our next generation. And unfortunately, for the Hindus, I'm keeping my eye on it every town, every day. I hope it doesn't spread because it spread to Birmingham. The problem and why they worry so much is when Muslims have rioted each time in the UK, it's always spread. After the Bradford riots, it spread to Stoke, it spread to Burnley, it spread to Oldham. They come out and just burn everything. Now, that was when they're rioting against the police. Unfortunately, now the Hindus are the target. There's innocent Hindu temples in most towns and cities. And you've got a community of people who aren't really fighters or aren't really aggressive. They're very peaceful. So it's a worry. It must be a terrifying time right now to be a Hindu in a Muslim populated city in the UK.
So what we also saw in Leicester is that they are trying to establish these no-go zones, essentially saying that if we are in substantial numbers, if the Muslims are in substantial numbers, then every community must follow the diktats of the Islamic community, which is dress in a certain way, talk in a certain way, not cross a mosque, not chant religious slogans, anything other than Allahu Akbar and Narai Takbir. And we've seen this menace, of course, in India, but we've also seen this menace growing in the UK substantially, where these no-go zones are established, where these Sharia-friendly zones have been established. Now, what I want to understand is, because it's also important for Leicester Hindus, how is the political class of UK viewing this issue? Because other than simply saying, the mayor said that this violence was sort of fanned by misinformation on social media, he didn't, of course, mention that the misinformation was by the Islamic community, like Majid Freeman, etc. But other than that, we haven't heard the UK government, politicians, even somebody like Mr. Rishi Sunak, who is a Hindu himself, come out and say something. So could you explain to me what this malaise in the political class of UK is, where they are refusing to come out and make a statement?
I've been surprised because usually political leaders are all straight out. I'm surprised that none of them have been in Leicester, on the ground in Leicester, talking about it. And well, am I surprised? It's because if they were to go and talk about it, they're going to have to condemn the actions of the Islamic community. And when it comes to no-go zones, we've actually had areas in East London, in London, where women have been attacked, gays have been attacked, where Muslims have filmed themselves going up to people saying, you cannot dress like that in our area. Yeah. Now, Muslims make up 4 to 5% of the UK population. On average, roughly 5 to 6 children per family. We have 1.3. This problem that started here is going to go like this. Yeah? And as Muslims become a dominant force, the culture becomes dominant, their traditions become dominant. And as you say, everything else, whether it be alcohol, pubs, the way you dress, what your practices, they are attacked. And again, I think it is important to say it's obviously not by all Muslims. There's many Muslims in those communities. I've been watching some great videos of Muslims confronting Mohammed Hijab, telling him to stop his rabble-rousing in Leicester. But what we see, the peaceful majority are irrelevant. Just as the peaceful majority of Germans in the war with Nazism, the majority of them were nice people, okay? Nazism was a dangerous ideology that had to be defeated. The majority of Muslims are probably cool people. But the danger that comes from the dedicated fanatics who follow Islam to the word have to be confronted. And right now, until we have a till we have leaders who have courage and who are brave enough to say what needs to be said, to implement what needs to be implemented, to tackle this scourge on humanity in every town and city of Islam, then we're not going to get anywhere. And yeah, and unfortunately, I see when I look at Sweden now, Sweden just had an election. They voted the Swedish Democrats in. That's the end of liberalism in that country. Well, when I say liberalism, there's nothing wrong with being liberal, but bending over backwards and pretending that there's not an elephant in the room, there is a problem. And it needs to be addressed. So I've been surprised by the silence of so many on this issue. And in fact, everyone just jumping to defend the Islamic community every time. Every time.
So since you have had, over a decade of experience going up against radical Islamists, what would you suggest the Hindu community in Leicester does? Because at this point of time, they're more or less sitting ducks. They don't have the weapons. They're not going to fight, because that's unfortunately not what Hindus do. Not in India, not in UK, not anywhere. Even in India, we are mostly sitting ducks. Very recently, we've had a spate of murders simply because a woman dared to quote from the Hadith. And everybody who was supporting her are under threat now. So it's a community which does not, unfortunately, know how to defend itself as far as being armed and street fighting is concerned. As you said, Hindu is not a community which inspires fear, whereas the Islamists are. And street power is something that we lack. So how would you suggest the Leicester community of Hindus prepares themselves for the onslaught that does not seem to end, because it's moved to Birmingham? And I don't think in Leicester, even though they've issued a joint statement of peace and harmony and all of that, it's a recurrent problem that once it's been sparked, it's going to keep happening. So what do you suggest? How does the Hindu community deal with this in Leicester?
Reach out to other communities. How did the Sikhs deal with it in the UK? They formed a movement, Shila Punjab, where they have volunteers from all their temples who, if there's an issue targeting the Sikhs, they come from all over the country. And 200 of them, 300 of them will turn up. And I witnessed that as we joined forces with the Sikhs as they done that in Luton. Again, a Sikh girl was raped in Luton by Pakistani gangs. The police were doing nothing. The Sikhs come in numbers. We came in numbers. We went to the police station and forced, because the police were fearful, the police were told, we're going to march into that area, which was the Muslim community. You deal with this or we're marching into that area. Yeah? Sikh women come, lots of them, and they shut the roads. And we said, we're marching into that area. The police then done their job. Unfortunately, they were forced to do their job. We saw it with the English Defence League. No one wants conflict, but sometimes you have to be prepared for it. And unfortunately, the Sikhs were well aware of that since the 1970s and 80s in the UK. And they formed a resistance, and many of their men have had to go to prison in defence of their women. Like, who doesn't want to defend your women and your daughters? Unfortunately, the Hindu community, I think, should be reaching out to other groups, other communities. As I said, there's many English people who'd be willing. Maybe it's time. None of these conversations should have to be none of us should have to be having these conversations, because this is the police's job. This is the authority's job. The police are there to protect and keep innocent people safe. But when they fail, they leave no alternative but for people to fill that void. And there's a lot of people watching very closely at what's happening in Leicester who will be making their mind up on whether they need to form resistance and be ready for these attacks and be ready to leave en masse. I remember when we had the English Defence League, we were looking at setting something similar up where we had volunteers and we had men in each city. And if there was an issue, we travel. We travel to that city and we make sure that they know that, because as I said, unfortunately, I've witnessed it through my life of growing up, and I've witnessed it that you cannot back down. You do not back down, and you do not show fear to Islamists or extremists, which is why I always say you're not going to scare us. You're not going to force us into submission. There's nothing you can do that's going to stop us telling the truth, that's going to stop our activism, and they need to understand that. And when they understand that and they know there's a battle, a lot of the time I've actually found Muslims that respect it. But you show them cowardice, which is what our leaders show, they jump all over it. So I'd say that the Hindus should be reaching out, and obviously they're the ones that the problem is it's such a delicate situation, because if people come to a city, those people will leave the city and they're left. and they're left living there. So it's a very dangerous situation, and it's very needs to be carefully thought out. Because if I thought I wanted to go to Leicester watching it all, yeah, but I don't know if that's the right decision, and will it benefit the Hindu community, or will it inflame the tensions for the Hindu community who still have to live there? So again, it's a decision that has to be made by them. But I think they should be reaching out to their Sikh brothers who have always been willing to defend and help. I know many great Sikhs organisations in this country. I know there's arguments in India over certain things, but they're still always been on the front line of defence against Islam in this country. And I think that I've always said that when a battle comes, the Sikhs will be right by our side. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a scary time for Hindu.
I think one of the problems that while talking to a lot of people, I have realized is that, there is a part of the community, and I'm not going to, talk about Leicester particularly, but this is my reading of the situation, that since big tech has branded you and a lot of people like you in such a negative light, you're almost like kryptonite, you have to admit, because of what the big tech has done.
Toxic Tommy.
So any sort of alliance with any such individual who has been so maligned by big tech, the fear is that the Hindu community will also end up being branded in the same light. I'll give you an example. So one of the themes that ran in my mentions was that Hindu nationalists were allying with white supremacists. Even though I know you're not that, but that is the narrative that's going to go out. So how do we as a people fight that sort of a perception that's going to be formed by corporate media and by the big tech?
Because you need to stop caring about what they say. You need to stop caring. For example, I haven't been involved before our interview. You're already getting called far right. You're already getting called extremists. Yeah, that is the narrative that they're going to push on you anyway. Maybe my involvement or my presence it might help them, but there comes a point. I remember saying to our supporters when they were branding us racist, I don't care anymore. Yeah, what you want to call us, right? I'm going to do what I know is right, and you can label me. If a label and a little words, and I think that the time of it worked for many years, the fear of being branded racist. Now people don't care in the UK from our community. We do not care what you say. Yeah? We don't care about your labels. You can stigmatise us, you can label us. What it does is it prevents people from being willing to stand with you, which is what they want. They don't want people uniting together. They want this little group, that little group. They want everyone separated, everyone niggling against each other, whereas really unity is what is needed. I think it's again, even I sit there and I've thought about it carefully, and I don't know what the right move is currently for the Hindus in Leicester or in Birmingham or wherever else this spreads to. But cowering, hiding, that's not the answer. So I actually thought it was great to see people resisting and coming together. But I guess now the numbers are so swelling so high and the level of violence, it must be, Again, I don't know what to advise for the people who live there. I just know myself, if this was happening in Luton, we wouldn't back down. I wouldn't back down from them. From the threats. Well, I'm not saying you don't have to go out and attack, because no one wants an attack. What we're saying is, no, we're not hiding. You're not telling us we can't walk down the road. We want to walk down the road, down any road. Yeah, we walk down that road. We had this with the English Defence League for years, of the police saying you can't enter this area. This is a Muslim area. No, it's not a Muslim area. There's Muslims who live there, but it's a street in Britain, and we're free to walk down whatever road. But again, you've seen the power of the media and how they twist it, how they're trying to paint a very different narrative to what's gone on in Leicester, and they're only successful so long as people don't comment. And I see under all the comments, in fact, under every article that I've seen on this, everyone is supporting the Hindu community. In all the comments, even on the journalists, on the mainstream media's piece, everyone's fully aware that it's not the Hindus.
Right. So I think if I understand you correctly, your solution for the Hindu community in Leicester is networking with other groups who are willing to help them, because on their own, I think they're out of depth. And
it would be very publicly demand the police action. Publicly come out and call the police out for their failures and their cowardice in dealing with this. The fact that people are allowed to come up to a Hindu temple and stand there and set fire to their symbols, then We need severe sentences for that. You need mass arrests, not just letting them all off like they do each time. So
Yeah.
my thing would be very clear, is to network and possibly come to agreements with other communities who are willing to send men if this continues. I hope it doesn't. I hope the police get a grip of it. I hope that they're forced and embarrassed into dealing with it properly. And I hope that those that are calling for peace within the Islamic community are successful. Because I have seen quite a few coming out as well, Muslims who are coming out trying to prevent what's happening. They've got a hard job because you've got a very violent, very aggressive youth of Pakistan.
That actually brings me to another point. I was watching your Rape of Britain, the documentary, and in one of the segments, you talk about how there was this one accused, a Pakistani Muslim, of grooming young girls, and his name came up by 3 or 4 victims. And in fact, there was a video of him going on record to condemn grooming, saying that this is anti-Islamic, we are embarrassed, this shouldn't happen, while all the while he was the one grooming young girls, raping them and prostituting them to other Muslim men. Do you see a parallel when there are calls for peace as far as Leicester is concerned?
I do when it's, I do. I do see the hypocrisy. I see some individuals may mean it and may not want it. I don't think when it comes to violence, but as I said, if you're a believer in Islam, if you believe this book of the Quran, if you wholeheartedly believe in the teachings of Muhammad, then you're taught to hate. You're taught Hindus who are idolized must be attacked. You're taught. It's justification for it. So, but you're right. A man who was raping kids, who was prostituting children, who was trafficking children, was then standing in front of the mosque saying, "This is not Islamic. This is not us." And but we see that all the time. We see many of the hate incidents when, like, hate crime. This is what is frustrating. I bet there ain't really any hate crime against Hindus, that are dealt with by the police. But all the hate crime we ever hear about is Islamophobia, and the majority of it turns out to be false. Turns out to be made up. Turns out to just be lies, as in America as well. A majority of the racist hate crime, it just turns out to be lies to further their own. They are very good at playing the victim when they're the aggressor, and then painting a picture to the world of, look, oh, poor us, poor us. No. But again, anyone who's grown up in a town or city with an Islamic community knows full well what's going on.
So that brings me to the subject that I wanted to discuss the most with you, which is the UK grooming gangs and the rape gangs that have been functioning in several cities of UK. And you've been one of the loudest activists against it and against the police action that followed in UK. So as you said, we have a phenomenon of love jihad in India, where there are certain specific characteristics of these crimes. One is is that the Muslim perpetrator is going to pretend to be a Hindu and then get into a relationship with the girl and then force them to convert, right? That's one of the cases. The other case is a simple abduction, rape, convert. We've seen a lot of the times, as you're aware, Hindus hold the cow sacred, and therefore most Hindus would not consume beef. And Muslims have force fed beef to Hindu girls simply to convert them. And there are a lot of such incidents and a lot of such characteristics which fall, within the broader crime category of love jihad. So if you could explain to me, what were the characteristics of the grooming gangs that were functioning in UK? How were they grooming these children?
So they'll get a child from the age of 10, 11, 12. They'll usually get a Pakistani who is 20, 21, 22, sometimes 17, 18, who go in and befriend the girl, become friends with them. They give them phones, they buy them cigarettes, they give them alcohol, they tell them they're beautiful. And they always, then that is the process of grooming, which sometimes can take 6 months before they lay a finger on the girl. They get the girl to fall in love with them. Love jihad. They get the girl to fall in love with them. They then isolate the girl by telling them, you're grown up, you're a big girl, your parents don't understand. They turn them against their own family every time. And they spend months doing it. Yeah, they treat the girls okay at the start. They buy them gifts. They treat them. They take them out. They show them excitement. They show them this. And then bit by bit, once they get their trust, and then they isolate them. So they get the girl, they make them change their friendship group. They stop them hanging around with their friends, and they get them to hang around with other girls in that situation who are with the Pakistani boys. And then at some point, they get with the Sikh girls. It's different with certain girls. So with the Sikh girls, they'll video the girl. They'll hide a camera. They'll have sex with the girl and they'll video it. And then they'll threaten the girl because of the shame. They'll threaten the girl to share the video on all the Sikh websites or all the Hindu websites. And that's what they'll do to make sure she can't get married. And then the girl's in a position where, if you do this for me, you now need to go sleep with my friend. And that's the start process in certain things. But in other cases, in the English cases, they will just have sex with the girl. Then the man will make up, I'm in trouble. I owe debt to these men and they're going to kill me. They're going to tie me. I need you to have sex with them. And then that's the start of the process for the girl. She's then prostituted. They'll pay them £10, £20. They'll buy them little things. And then that girl, as I said, one of the girls in our Telford case was raped by over 200 men. Some of them raped by 10, 20 men in a night. Minibuses of men have come from Birmingham. A minibus full of men come to a house and the men queued up the stairs, one by one, going in and raping a 12-year-old girl. When one of the girls, if we look at the case in Oxford, they heated up an iron rod with the letter M. They heated it up, and on a 12-year-old girl's bum, they scolded her with the letter M because she was the property of Muhammad. Again, not my opinion, not Tommy Robinson saying this. These are from court transcripts of cases, yeah. Which is why, and I'll get on. They got one girl, they took her, they nailed her tongue to the table. These girls, for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, sometimes 10 years, were led through a life of prostitution, misery, and torture. Each of the men, as I ask all of the girls that I meet, what did they call you? Did they say anything? Yes, you dirty gullah slag. Yeah, you white slag. You kafar. Yeah, you infidel. All of the words and the justifications, similar to making the Hindu girl eat meat. All of it is religious-based hate. All of it. Okay, it's racial. It's religious. The torturing of the girls, the murdering of the girls, which have been many girls murdered, many girls killed. The police investigations failed. This is what's happening. And you said in many towns, there's 55 towns that have been highlighted with mass gangs. Telford alone, as I said, 200 men. Out of those 200 men identified in the police investigation, only 11 have been prosecuted. Why? Why was this hidden? And hidden in one town, okay, is a council failure. Hidden in 2 towns or 3 towns, council failure. Hidden for 30 years in every town and city. That is a conspiracy that's coming from the top, from the Home Office and the government, which there has been now proof that they knew about it. And they conspired to suppress the story and hide the story. So they facilitated it. They were the enablers of it, the police and the council. And to some people, this is unthinkable. Many in India know the influence that Islam has. They know how pressurizing it is. They know what they can get away with. And they know how people pander and bow to them. They know the influence of the dollar that comes from Saudi and Iran and Qatar. So many people will experience this. But to some people, they sit and think, really? It's only when the Rotherham report come out, which was an in-depth report, an independent report, that everything we'd been saying for a decade was proven. We were called, some of those labels you gave me earlier, that before this was all proven, one of my labels was that I was basically making stuff up. When I sat on TV and said they're raping our daughters in towns and cities, you're making it up. You are inflaming situations. You're lying. You're misinformation. All of this were the accusations against us. We have been proven right in everything we said. And that is why the ultimate end goal has had to be deplatforming us, because people were listening. People were understanding we were telling the truth, and raising awareness. And this grooming is where what I do. We have shifted the Overton window. The Overton window is what is politically acceptable to talk about. No one spoke about grooming gangs. Yeah? Then they started talking about them because we forced them to. The English Defence League forced that. No one identified them as Pakistani or Muslim. They were identified as Asian. We moved that. Yeah? They're now identified as Pakistani and Muslim. Yeah? We've got to this position. We talk about the Islamic scripture and justification that's given to it. 4 verses in the Quran that tell them outside of your 4 wives, you can take whatever the right arm possess. Yeah? They are told, i.e. slaves. Verses in the Quran that give instructions on how to divorce prepubescent children. So all of these things is religious scripture, and it's quite comical to see them all blaming the game of cricket. As though that's the driving force for these Muslims who are coming now from all over the country over a game of cricket. Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is.
So, we've spoken about grooming gangs, we've spoken about Leicester. How do you, I mean, I know you've said that, you just stop caring after a point, but there are a lot of us in India as well who are now, for the past few years, for the past decade or so, we have been very vocal. We've been writing about Islamism and all of that. How did your family deal with the kind of vilification that comes with the path that you've chosen? Because I struggle. I wonder if my child is going to get affected someday when she grows up. She's 6. You wonder if you'll have to get security because you don't know when you'll be attacked. And it's not just me. There are so many like me who have been speaking out for the past decade and who feel threatened because you're branded to a point where the world community stops feeling any sort of sympathy or shock when you're murdered.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
for example, when Samuel Paty was murdered, it was world news. In India, when Kanhaiya Kumar was murdered, he was beheaded because he supported a woman who quoted from the Hadith. It made news nowhere. So it almost feels like the vilification is such that people become desensitized to even your murder and rape. So how did you deal with that kind of onslaught from the big tech, from media, from leftists, from Islamists? How did your family deal with it and how did you deal with it?
so I had, because of the power I had on social media up until just 3 years ago, 4 years ago, because of the power I had, I dealt with it by proving what they said was wrong. And my videos, so they might do a BBC program that had 200,000 views. I'd make my video, which would annihilate their story and show how it's a lie, and I'd get 2 million views. So I had the power at that time where I was winning. I was reaching the people. I was reaching everyone to understand that. That's why many of your supporters are correcting, saying, no, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. He's not racist, he's not this. So, but then the worrying time for me was when I was deleted, because then I thought, the new generation are only going to get told who I am. They're not going to know who I am. They don't get to hear this. They don't get to hear straight from me. They get told I'm a racist. They get told I'm an extremist. And you're right about, you said you had a 6-year-old. I have had, and how have I dealt with it? At times, not very well. I felt like in the original days, 2000 and probably 2013, there were 6 Muslims who were sent to jail for 30 years. They were caught with guns, bombs, and IEDs on the way to kill us. Now, at that time, I then thought, that order's come from somewhere, that we must be killed. It's not just 6 stupid Pakistanis in Birmingham. I thought the order's come. Then for a little while, I felt like I was walking around with a terminal illness, because I thought at some point they're going to get us. But then when you accept that, I think it's pretty empowering, because I've accepted it, and then I don't care. Not that I don't care, but that's years of it. So I had a lot of bad times. I had a lot of struggle times of accepting the threats, especially when I thought of my children. I thought, how are they going to live with this? But then I thought about, I know, and I'm very deep on my thoughts of it. I know that everything I've said, I'll be proven as on the right side of history. I know that what I've done is righteous. I know, and when I think about previous generations in the UK and our forefathers, who would have run into battle to defend and fight for the freedoms that we have been handed down. And then I thought, no one's firing bullets at me every day. You get lads who go sign up for the British military for £22,000 a year, who are getting shot in Afghanistan or losing their legs. Yeah, I thought, what? I get punched every now and then. I've had attacks. I am under threat, but in comparison, it's pretty minute comparison to what the courage shown by our forefathers in battles across the globe. The courage shown, I'll go quote again because I love the Sikhs, 88,000 Sikhs dying wearing their turbans in the world wars. I look at the millions that were murdered and massacred, and I think of this and think it's nothing really. We're just, so I sort of like, but then it was the kids, and I worried about the kids. But then at the same time, I think that all of this will play out and history will judge us all. And the fight we have is so important. I think it's the most important era of this country's history we've ever had. Of what's happening now in Europe with freedom, it's sort of like combined itself with the problems and the threats of Islam. I think, I don't know where you're at, but it's combined itself in the globalist plan and that when we come to COVID and digital currency and where we're at, and the total control that's coming and the breakdown of the nation state, which is what they need. I think it's all sort of played its part in coming together. And I know I'm right. So I've said to family members, I had my ex-wife's father said, just stop. This is in the early days. Like, they're threatening their lives. Just stop. And I said, am I wrong? He said, I'm not saying you're wrong. I said, so stop because they're threatening us. Yeah. I said, no, I can't do that. I think it's total cowardice. And I think it's important. And do you know what else? Even if I wanted to stop, you're probably in the same position now. You've built a following, yeah? You've built a following. People rely on you, yeah? So I used a fake name, Tommy Robinson. I wore a mask for the first 12 months of my activism because I didn't want to talk about it, because I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to get attacked, and I had successful businesses. So I was the person that everyone else is who's fearful of speaking. I was forced into this position, and then now I speak about it. So I understand the people who are fearful, but people rely on you, people rely on me. We're in a position now where you've got a platform there. You have many Indians who are relying on you to get this message out. If you wanted to stop, it's bigger than you. The problem's bigger than you. The problem's bigger than me. The problem's bigger than my 3 children. So we don't really have an option. We're sort of, even if you wanted to, I take my time out now and then. I have a few weeks here and a few weeks there. I just turn off my phone. But I don't think there is an option to prevent us, if we really care about freedom and care about the futures of our nations, if you care about protecting Hindus, if we care about Great Britain, if we care about these things, there's no option. So, and we just have to deal with it.
Yeah. My last question to you is, there was a snippet in your interview with Imam Tawhidi where he said that you and him had a conversation about how perhaps we could change our terminology. I'm sorry, give me 1 second.
In this country, who's this? Do you know? They do Capri Suns. What am I missed here, Spence? One's mask. Imagine sitting out there in a mask. Oh my God.
I apologize. That was my daughter's karate teacher, because I'm teaching her how to kick some ass in case.
Good. Anyway,
yeah. So, as I was saying, there was a segment where Imam Tawhidi said that perhaps by changing some of the terminology that we use when we are talking, we could make a larger impact. And the argument was essentially that even he admitted that Islam cannot reform. At least for the next few centuries, Islam is not reforming. So he suggested that perhaps different phraseology, different terminology being used while people like you and I are conversing could perhaps make a greater impact. So A, what do you think of that? And B, what is your suggestion to activists like you in India? Because we have such organizations in India, which are Hindu organizations fighting Islamists. What is your suggestion for them?
We cannot use different terminology. It's weak. They want us to use the word Islamist. Yeah? I've had this a lot. Yeah? Use Islamist, or let Islam off the hook. Yeah? Everything you're saying of Islamist, political Islam, is Islam. So previous leaders, especially in our country, when I go through history, they didn't talk about extreme interpretations of Islam. They just spoke about Islam. Muhammad was known as a warrior. Yeah, throughout history. It's only now in the current era where Islam has infiltrated and come into every country that now there's different interpretations of Islam and peaceful, and we have to be careful about what we say, and we have to tell the truth. That's it. And the truth is Islam's problematic. The truth is it's Islamist. That's just a coward. You're just trying to divert attention away from Islam, and I want Islam to be held to account. We have to hold the Quran to account, Muhammad to account for who he was and what he spread. And so, no, I disagreed with Imam Tawhidi. I understand the need not to alienate every individual Muslim, and we don't want to push them, but I'd rather educate a lot of them and help them. But with apostasy rules, there's such a young movement of Muslims who don't even believe it. Yeah, in many countries, who are forced into it because they'll get killed, they'll get isolated from their family, there's so many problems, but I will never, ever, ever, and I've been asked so many times to change my language and discussion from taking the blame away from Islam. And that's not the truth, so I won't do it. With regards to Hindu organizations in India, I've said many times that the problem that you face in India is not an Indian problem. The problem we're facing here is not a UK problem. It's a worldwide, global problem from Islam. And the more people you can align with and spread your message with and show solidarity with, and show that I was going to travel to Nigeria as one example, because I wanted to show the people in the UK what's happening in Nigeria, what's happening to the Christians. Same with India. If you come and toured a different country and said, listen to what's happening, many people in the UK won't know of Love Jihad. Yeah. So to come to India and show of Love Jihad and show the British public that we are not alone here. Yeah? This problem is Islam, it's worldwide, and to show solidarity with other groups. As always, when we had the English Defence League, we went to Europe and we tried to build defence leagues in multiple countries. We set up a Danish Defence League, a German Defence League. We were ahead of the curve, really, because I don't think the general population of Europe really understood and were really ready for that. I think they are now. I think that you see by mass protests and political movements that are growing, Swedish Democrats. I think you see a lot of the political leaders coming out and speaking more freely about Islam from the populist parties. But yeah, I think that free speech is fundamental to anything we want to do. So there must be an alliance of, I'm doing a speech soon in a parliament in Europe about free speech and about how we need a manifesto of freedom. And it has to be agreed for from all these groups, because with free speech, we can criticize Islam, we can highlight the problems from Islam, we can highlight the problems of government, the problems of all of them can be assessed, and we can challenge them. But what they're doing now with taking away our free speech through big tech, it's going to stagnate our society and stagnate our growth as countries, and will be ruled rather than governed. And that's where it's heading with the attacks on free speech. But I think that for Hindu groups, reach out and align yourselves with European groups. Reach out, look to other countries and try and form alliances and highlight what's happening in all the other countries, the problems to show that it's Islam. It's not just a specific argument over India and Pakistan. No, it's not. It's not over cricket. No, it's not. It's not what's happening. It's spread. And the problem from everything is Islam and the scripture.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Tommy. I can only hope that this interview is allowed to be broadcast on YouTube and we're not deplatformed.
They don't deplatform my interviews. So any video I put up, they do. So
all right, great. So hopefully your message will create some sort of awareness in the United Kingdom about the plight of Hindus and what they are facing in Leicester. And I hope that the Leicester Hindus align with people like you who can go and help them, because they certainly need help at this point of time. So thank you so much, Tommy, and hope we speak again soon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And make sure to anyone, get over on Getter. Okay, download the app. Get on Getter. I'm under Tommy Robinson #1. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers.
Just my thoughts on when this interview didn't go out. I was incredibly disappointed, if I'm honest. I'm relieved the interview is now going out. I do understand the concerns and the fear from the Hindu community, but my message to you in the UK is, no matter what you do, the media slandered you as extremists. They attacked you. They sided with the radical Islamists. Every time. The politicians sided with them. No one defended you. That's not going to change. The government, the politicians, the media, none of them feared the Hindu community. You haven't got a big enough vote bank in this country like the Islamic community have to pander to. What we witnessed was total appeasement. And shelving an interview is appeasement too. What happens if you allow this appeasement? You're too scared of being labelled, you're too scared of being linked with people. What else is it you are self-censoring about? What else is it about yourselves, about your identity, about crimes in your community? What else is it you're willing to censor because of fear? Because that's what it comes down to, fear. The time for being scared is gone, okay? What I want the Hindu community to know is that if there were ever problems in the UK, I would be willing and I would love to mobilise people to stand united with you, because we stand with you in the face of persecution and targeting of violence by Islamic radicals, which is what we saw in Leicester, an innocent Hindu community coming under attack, okay? And look at the labels they give to you, look at how you were labelled, look at the words that were used to describe your community. If those were lies, if the media were lying about you, what do you think they're doing when they talk about me? All the labels I'm given. as an extremist, as a white supremacist. It's ridiculous. So I'm happy that free speech has won on this occasion. Never, ever allow yourselves to be censored through fear of radical Islamic jihadist extremists. Again, I send my love. I hope everyone's in peace within the Hindu community, and everyone should keep their eyes on this situation in Great Britain.